The Lord be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to the people in the synagogue at Nazareth, "Amen, I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own native place. Indeed, I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the sky was closed for 3.5 years, and a severe famine spread over the entire land. It was to none of these that Elijah was sent, but only to a widow in Zarephath in the land of Sidon. Again, there were many lepers in Israel during the time of Elisha the prophet. Yet not one of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian." When the people in the synagogue heard this, they were all filled with fury. They rose up, drove him out of town, led him to the brow of the hill on which their town had been built, to hurl him down headlong. But he passed through the midst of them and went away. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
This morning we find Jesus in his native town of Nazareth, and he was always accustomed on Saturday to go to the synagogue. The synagogue was different from the temple. There was only one temple where animals were slaughtered and offered sacrifice to God. But every village and so had a synagogue, and a synagogue was really a place where they taught. So on the Saturday, somebody was selected, or somebody would come forward to do the reading and to preach the homily. Jesus goes on the Saturday, and he is selected, or he volunteers to do the reading. And then it comes the gospel. The relationship between the Jews and the non-Jews, the Gentiles, in those days was the bitterest you could find. In fact, I was thinking this morning, it was very much like the situation in Israel this morning, the relationship between the Jews and the Palestinians. Absolute hatred. In fact, in those days, the Jews referred to the Gentiles as dogs. That was the relationship. But now Jesus is preaching this morning, and he gives two examples of where two non-Jewish persons were healed by God, but that the Jewish widows were not healed. And the first one, of course, the first reading this morning, is the story of Naaman, who was an important official in the army. And you read the discussion, he goes and he listens and he says, "No, I can't do that." But then some young girl pleads with him, "No, go and wash in the river Jordan." And eventually he succumbs, and he's cured of his leprosy. And then the widow of Zarephath was the very same. She was a Gentile, she was non-Jewish, and God heals her. So when the people now, the natives in his own town, Jewish people, hear this, they're absolutely furious. I mean, it's such an insult to them that God would heal two non-Jewish people and wouldn't heal their own people. And so you see what they try to get rid of him and kill him and so on. In other words, there was a wall, and a wall is very much in the news today by the politicians. Walls, walls, walls. And there was a huge wall between the Jewish people and the non-Jewishes in those days. During the week, or was it last week, politicians were talking about walls. And Pope Francis said something like that Christians should be not building walls, but building bridges. And one politician was accused that the Pope was talking about him. But of course, what happened, the Vatican says no, he was not referring to any politician. He was referring to all of us who build walls. Sometimes we build walls in our own families, ignore somebody. I remember when the AIDS virus came out, I think it was 1983. Some people were banished from their home by their parents. And there was a famous case about a young man called Ryan White, somewhere in the Middle East where that happened to. Well, thank God at least now we have medications and so on that prolongs the life of people with this terrible disease. In fact, some of them seem to be able to live a normal life. But some of them were discarded by their own parents. In other words, a wall was set up between them. It happens sometimes, for example, when some person goes off and marries a Catholic, and they're banished by the family. I know of a personal case of that. He was a man who worked for the Diocese of Brooklyn. He was Jewish. And there he met an Irish girl called Conlon. They married. And his parents said they would never want to see him again. And that man became a deacon in the church here in Miami. I knew him very, very well. They never saw their grandkids. That was the size of the wall that they had erected between themselves and their son. It happens, even in ourselves. So Pope Francis is absolutely right. He said anybody who doesn't build bridges but builds wall is not a Christian. Is not a Christian. That's a very powerful statement. So it's an examen of conscience for each and every one of us, especially during this season of Lent, which is a season of forgiveness and reconciliation.